Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for FourCast is provided by Cachefly at CACHEFLY.com.
This episode of FourCast is brought to you by Squarespace.com, the fast and easy way to publish a high-quality website or blog. For a free 14-day trial, go to squarespace.com/forecast.
What sort of future do you think we're heading for? How will we live as we slip into the 21st century?
Hey everybody, welcome back to FourCast. This is FourCast episode 68. I'm Scott Johnson.
And I'm Tom Merritt.
And welcome back to the show, everybody. This is the show where we get to talk to a couple of great guests about their future predictions. Could be in technology, social science. It doesn't matter. They bring to the table whatever their expertise is, and we try to talk about what may be in your future. Let's start with our first guest, Ariel Waldman. He is, she, open science strategist, interactive designer, and founder of spacehack.org, created Science Hack Day in San Francisco. Ariel, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Ariel was recently here at the cottage helping robots to go wild in our backyard.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Oh, man, I'm sorry I missed that. That sounds pretty cool. Also with us is David Kirkpatrick. He is the author of The Facebook Effect, the inside story of the company that is connecting the world. He's also founder of Techonomy and does conferences all over the place dealing with technology, how it deals with our everyday lives. Welcome to the show, David.
Thanks. Good to be here. Thanks for having me.
It's good to have you both. Normally when we start the show, we like to start with an email from one of our great listeners. Tom, I think we got one this time.
From Dino, he says, "Hey, Tom and Scott, I have a crazy prediction for you that just might pan out in the next decade. Mind control is ever evolving for devices, but I wonder if it might work both ways. I predict that in relatively short-term future, there will be services that can take images from your mind and convert them into a digital vector format. This would be incredibly useful in a million ways, including for general memory purposes or maybe even in court. The niche uses for this are way more interesting, though. I read an article in Wired about how competitive memorizers use fantastical images in their head. Think Jammerbee, our producer, sporting gauges while riding a motorcycle with wings, to remember, say, a certain card number. A digital copy would make this much easier and more efficient. Love the show. Keep up the good work."
Wow, Dino, this is interesting. I kind of do some of this stuff a little bit now with things I need to remember, but not nearly this crazy. I'm guessing if you're really into memorizing things. And when he says, I mean, Tom, when he says competitive memorizers, who falls into that category? I've never heard of such a thing.
I haven't either. Ariel or David, have either one of you become familiar with competitive memorizers?
There was an article, I think, in the New York Times about that just the other day, actually. There apparently are extensive memory competitions, and there's all kinds of tricks people use to memorize 80 numbers in 5 minutes kind of thing.
So it's
that'd be really
a
interesting
spelling bee for memory.
Yeah, but they use tricks like they associate numbers with colors in order to remember numbers, and they remember names by associating them with all kinds of characteristics about the word that the name represents or the person's face. It's actually quite interesting how competitive memory people operate.
Well, so I'm guessing what they probably do is they have some kind of forum where they are fed a bunch of information, same information in some kind of controlled environment or controlled space. Those people have to take that information, memorize it based on, I don't know what, visual cues or reading it or something, are sent somewhere, and then they come back, I assume, to some kind of stage, and then they compete in the International Memorization Olympics or something. I would really be fascinated to see that at play. And it's interesting that if that sort of thing works, or if that sort of thing exists, it seems like a great way to sort of come up with new techniques to memorize stuff I could probably benefit from.
Yeah, GrungeBob points out in the chat room there are people that remember pi, so that's just kind of a type of competitive memory. Ariel, have you run into any of this kind of stuff?
Not too much, no. It's something that I find fascinating, though, because it's really expanding the spelling bee. So I think it would be a lot more fun and interesting to watch people actually in the process of doing this type of thing.
We should do that on Twit. I mean, if you can have the spelling bee on ESPN, we could have competitive memory competitions, right?
Oh, I love that idea. That's a great idea. Love emails like this. Keep them coming. Send your emails to fourcastpodcast@gmail.com, or you can post a comment right there on fourcastpodcast.com. We love bringing this stuff up on the show. Let's start with our short-term predictions. This is where we get to talk about next couple of years, 5 years, 10 years, something in that range. Let's start with Ariel this time. What are your short-term predictions, Ariel?
So my main short-term prediction is that there's going to be a citizen science renaissance within the next few years. So if you can imagine owning a Pico satellite as easily as you can a MacBook, or getting a ticket into orbit for maybe $30,000 instead of the current $200,000 to Virgin Galactic. And I think there might also be a public space race to land on the moon. So breaking more outside of government agencies and institutions, and actually having a citizen science renaissance happen.
Yeah, this is already being presaged a lot by amateur astronomers, right? They're sort of the vanguard, where some real science is being done by folks who are just enthusiastic and have some pretty good, cheap equipment that's high quality and making, or at least contributing to, astronomical discoveries.
Yeah. There's a lot of stuff that's breaking the way for this to happen, but I think it's going to be having a lot of momentum in the coming years, because right now we have things like Google Lunar X Prize, which are involve different people around the world sending robots to the moon. And if you think about it, the very first robot that crash landed into the moon was just 7 years before we landed a man on the moon. So in just 7 years gap, we were crash landing robots to sending humans to the moon. So I think it's really starting to pave the way for everyone around the world to start doing this within the next few years.
So the idea of just go back to because you caught my ear there early when you said maybe we'd all have, the way we have phones or personal devices now, we might all have our own little satellite, for example,
right.
Some small satellite we could send into orbit, and it would act as our GPS, our communication system, a way to deliver all sorts of content, video, audio, whatever. It could be our guide through life, really. Mm-hmm. What is the capacity of the orbital plane for that many, potentially that many devices flying up there? Do you have any notion of that? Like what that would be like? Is it too congested? Are we going to have them smacking into each other? Got to buy insurance for that sort of thing? Like how do you foresee that would work?
Orbital debris is definitely a serious problem that's being looked at by a lot of people right now. But the great thing about these Pico satellites is that they're typically put on an orbit so that they are decaying within a few weeks, if not months. So when they launch, they burn back up in the Earth's atmosphere within a few weeks or months. So they're not actually adding to extra orbital debris. What the capacity is in that space for while we have a lot of satellites up there at once, I'm not exactly sure. But the fact that they have fairly quick burn rates means that it wouldn't actually be contributing to creating extra space junk, which is good.
David, any thoughts on what it would mean to have that many satellites in the air, or the idea that you could have your own sort of personal space station floating around up there?
Well, I mean, what struck me about the idea was the whole idea of more people becoming serious scientists, or a proliferation of science emerging with a lot more individual involvement of ordinary people. I think that's very plausible, and it's a really reasonable prediction. But I would not anticipate that it would happen in the form of sort of lone scientists, which is kind of the implication of the way that Ariel was mentioning it. To me, everything that's going on right now is about collaboration in some form or another. And, you know, the expense of any kind of research is declining with extraordinary speed. So that I think that we will probably see, and I'm sure we could already identify it if we were really looking for it right now, a real tremendous increase in ordinary people contributing in a meaningful way to scientific advance. Because of their ability to be connected to other like-minded researchers, and whether it involves space satellites and such things, or a lot of other kinds of things we could imagine, I think it will happen. But I would certainly doubt that the way, if we got to a lot of sort of ad hoc satellites, that they would be sort of one person's project. I think it would make a lot more sense to make them, to imagine them to be sort of collaborative activities, just like so much else is these days.
Oh,
Well,
definitely.
You'd hope that you could you'd kind of have a collective harness of all these things. Like the idea, it kind of reminds me a couple of years ago, and I guess still today, the folding project that got undertaken by the PS3 buying community. They were essentially encouraged to run this software. Sony participated, and people can run these things all night. And it's a way of coming up with cures for genetic diseases and all sorts of stuff. I think that's really cool. That the collective power of these otherwise, game machines, video machines are just sort of all night churning away, contributing to a collective resource. Do you see, Ariel, that sort of potential in this kind of thing where we're now suddenly, we have all this communication power and we have all this, sort of computing power flowing all over the place, connecting those and creating some kind of collective of knowledge or something?
Yeah, for sure. And to clarify, citizen science really should always be collaborative. It's something where it's moving away from being DIY and is really more about open collaboration between people with diverse different sets of backgrounds. So, and a lot of the stuff that you're referencing is distributed computing projects, which are getting a lot better than they used to be. The really famous one was SETI at Home, but it had some drawbacks in that you weren't really interacting with the scientists around it, and you weren't really interacting with other people who were using it. But I think distributed computing projects are getting better and realizing that part of the collaboration is creating a machine learning sort of feedback loop so that you have humans working out problems together and feeding that information to robots so that robots can then give them more qualified data so that you're making both robots and humans happy and everyone's collaborating on a mass level. So I think there's a lot of potential for it to be getting even better and more engaging within the coming years.
And you have to keep the robots happy or they'll turn against us.
Yeah, exactly.
But I think what's really exciting about this whole kind of arena is the combination of all these empowered people that have a net connection and their own intellectual resources, even in the most remote places, and the extraordinary advance in computing power that's happening simultaneously with the connectedness, growing, so that you have, the sort of a two. Well, I'm sure there's others we could identify, but those two things alone are each one of them, such an incredible accelerator of discovery and research. I think it's kind of an amazing bunch of things we could imagine in the near future.
Yeah, because you have access to the training you need. You have access to equipment that is more accessible and cheaper than it's ever been before. And you have access to the amount of support you want or is appropriate. An astronomer who's looking through his telescope, my first example, doesn't need a lot of other people to look through the telescope. But after he's found something, he needs his astronomy club, to kind of gather around and check it and look at it and analyze. And is that what I think I see? And then you can sort of pass it along to the broader community and have people comment on it. And it's a fantastic world we live in. I think it's a great prediction, Ariel.
I completely agree. That's awesome. David, let's throw it over to you. What do you see in the short term, our short-term collective future?
Well, I think we disagree a little bit about what constitutes short-term and long-term, because you said 5 to 10 years, and to me that is extremely long-term given the pace of change we're experiencing right now. But I'll tell you one that is maybe sort of medium-term. I think it probably will, within 5 years, could be very likely manifested. Certainly, I'm sure some version of it or I believe, but within 10 years certainly would be happening and could be a lot sooner. One of the things that I find extremely interesting that is essentially technologically possible now, and some people are actually starting to do, and there are even products to help you do it, is record everything in your life in video. I think that, Gordon Bell wrote a book about that last year. Microsoft's been doing research in that for quite a few years. And I think that the way I'm interested in looking at it is, given that I've spent several years studying Facebook, and many people often ask me, what is going to replace Facebook? What's the next thing? And I mean, everything gets replaced, so something certainly will. And I always say it's not going to be just a social network that's somebody else is doing in a slightly different way. It's going to be some fundamentally different form of communication. And one thing that I've speculated about is that if people really do sort of routinely start recording everything in video, which I believe some people, I think a growing number of people will want to do, then you could apply algorithmic tools to the data, the video that you collect that way, and effectively begin to assemble a different kind of social network that would be more a genuine reflection of your actual real world experience. And it would probably incorporate more than just your human relationships, because you could algorithmically analyze everywhere you go, everything you do. And of course, you could apply your own selective analytics on top of that, human analytics. But I think that effectively, with the proliferation of data, and particularly video data, we're going to really see social computing as we now think of it will be replaced by some kind of video-based, real-time, and continually stored computing. I'm not being as specific as probably I should be, but it's a directional prediction that I'm quite confident some version of is very likely.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. In fact, not just video and obviously audio, but also data points. Things like what was the temperature, what were the ambient conditions at that point where you were, can be kind of put in as metadata while you're recording all of this. And you get a fascinating look back at what people were doing and experiencing at that time that we've never had before. And it really turns it on its head, this idea of privacy, right? We're almost there. A lot of people think, especially you hear about London a lot, that every move you make is recorded. But I think we sort of, I can see us seizing that means for ourselves and saying, you know what, I'm not going to worry about other people recording. I'm going to record it, and I'm going to own my own life more directly that way.
Well, it's interesting too. If you look at what you said earlier about Facebook is doing the thing it does now, and you're convinced that whatever the next revolution in social networking or engineering or whatever won't come from just a competitor to Facebook. Probably they'll maximize whatever this medium is going to give us for the next little while, and it'll have to be a whole new medium. Do you suppose it's a new delivery method to get stuff to people? Is it something completely outside the realm of keyboard, mouse, and screen, or mobile phone and small screen? Do you foresee any of that sort of stuff?
Well, first of all, I believe anything that's going to come in social in coming years is going to be based on mobile devices. I think more or less that's all that's going to exist. And I think the devices will get smaller and will proliferate, probably be in my glasses or whatever. But certainly it will be something we have on our person. And, I will say, I think one of the interesting things about Facebook, which is actually a big theme of my book, is their amazingly rapid iteration and their ability to continue changing. And they do that because they don't want to be rendered irrelevant. And they will try whatever comes along to mimic it and render it irrelevant. But I don't think they will always necessarily. They certainly at some point will fail. And one thing that I've observed is that video is one thing that, especially communications video, is something Facebook has historically done very poorly. And therefore, it's probably where the biggest opportunity exists for someone to come along and bypass them. Facebook is based on a fundamentally textual interface, which is really a creature of the web 7 years ago when Facebook was invented. And even though it has add-ons to that, it's still kind of, in a certain way, locked into a modality of 2004. But I just want to clarify, one of the things I think is interesting about full-time video and social is, aside from all the other things you're right that we will be able to study or record, just recording who exactly we interact with in the real world on an ongoing basis, so that we, of course it has all kinds of other implications for memory, which is something we were discussing before. And I think it's also that we could have a whole discussion about that, because if you have video of everything you ever did, that becomes an auxiliary memory of a certain sort. But I think assembling, I mean, Facebook's always been about your real world social network, but it's gone very far away from that because of just our social habits of being afraid to say no to people, etc. But if we really want to accelerate and improve our relationships with people we really care about, I think this might be one way.
The chat room said something interesting. It says, he wants to know, he says, David, are you talking about taking the first person experience to the third person? Is that kind of the perspective we're talking about here?
I don't know what that means exactly. What do you think that means?
I don't know either for sure.
I think I have an understanding of that. I think he's talking about, essentially, if you're video recording everything that you do, then inherently that means you're watching things that you do occasionally. So you are looking at yourself from more of I'm assuming they're saying a third person perspective. And so I am, to Tom's point, I really like the idea that data is going to become a really huge part, and that might be the next thing. Is the way you were describing it was almost as having an almanac of your life, which is really compelling. I'm a little bit skeptical on the video part, though, because if you're constantly taking a video of everything of your life, when are you going to have time to sit down and watch video? Video is very time consuming, and it's hard for most of us to even get through 30 seconds on a YouTube video. So there has to be really fundamental changes in how we consume video so that it can become something that's realistic and useful, and isn't something that we have to dig through in order to, check back and see that really compelling moment that we gave in a meeting a couple days ago or something. So consuming it is something that I think would be problematic, possibly.
That's a good point. If somebody's in a meeting and they've had an incredible meeting and they really want to share this with people or something, you don't want to give them a 45-minute meeting and say, oh, by the way, you're going to want to jump to, the 42-minute mark because that's really where things got good. And it's a few seconds after that, but then you told them wrong and they couldn't find it. So by today's standards, that's not a very searchable, usable medium. There would have to be some things put in place that made that as quick as us just looking at sound bites, checking quick Google News, the things we do now with, written text and stuff online. We would need that to be probably more a part of this browsing experience. David, you were going to say something. Well,
no, I think that I understand now the first person, third person point, and I think that probably would be a piece of this, but by no means in my guess the main piece. I think the main thing that would be likely to happen is that the video would be recorded primarily in order to be subjected to analytics and algorithmic analysis that would then give you data that would increase and improve your real world, future experience, because you would have a better understanding of your history and a better understanding of your relationships. And it definitely would serve as a memory aid. And maybe that's really what I'm kind of leaning towards more discussing it with you. And again, I don't think that would come from reviewing the video yourself mostly, although that would be an opportunity you'd have. It would be more by just analytics reporting to you what you did. And I think we'll have, trivially simple search tools for video. And probably a lot of that search will be happening and categorizing things in real time, just again, because of the extraordinary processing power that is increasingly available to us. And of course, the trivially low cost of storage.
And if you're recording your whole life, all your citizen scientists are helped out because that's more data points for them to use in their studies. So,
I'm all for more data.
It's one of the things I'd say about this. It's interesting if you look at, Blippy is one of those services that a lot of people find extraordinary that it could possibly exist, where people give all their credit card data to the world and whatever they're purchasing. I think it's the same kind of mindset that might also come into play here, where a certain cohort, and it might be a considerable number of people, would decide to make their entire life video available to everyone and available to collective analysis and analytics, which might then enable us to discover interesting things sociologically, politically, culturally, that I have no idea what it might result in, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was something extremely interesting.
I completely agree. Right before we move on to our long-term predictions, I can't get this out of my head, but it just seems like if you were in a meeting with a bunch of friends and you know that somebody mentioned a movie you need to rent that you haven't seen before, but you couldn't remember for the life of you what it is, how cool would it be to pick up your phone or whatever portable device it is at the time and say movie and have that thing go and find any reference to the word movie like Google does for us now with text online and just play it right then. And they tell you the movie and off you go.
You're talking about like a 1 year prediction. That's like a 1 year.
If that can happen this year, I'd be a very happy guy.
Something like that is practically possible now, really.
That's true. All right, well, let's move on to our long-term predictions. This is where things get a little bit crazier, and we'll leave it with you, David. I know you feel like long-term is 5 years from now, but Give us the long tail on this stuff. What do you say?
Thank you. Well, in order to make what I would rather diverge from technology to some degree, or go to a technology influence prediction rather than a technology prediction per se, if I'm really thinking long term. And obviously, I think whenever you think long term, it's hard to avoid wish fulfillment and what you hope to see. But I do think there is an argument that can be made that we are headed toward a period of far more global harmony. And that would be, a sort of optimistic long-term prediction that I would make. And I think that it's a consequence of the likely economic growth of the developing world and a declining sense of envy of the developed world. And, as more and more parts of the world seek to really just accelerate their own affluence and comfort and happiness, I think we're going to see less desire to basically take something from somebody else, which is effectively the root of conflict. And I again, like I said, I see the world through the lens of Facebook, which I somewhat obsess over, and all these things that have been happening in the Arab world over the last month or so, while they're by no means authoritative directional indicators, I think they do go to show that the individual is gaining more say in society generally. And that is most revolutionary and most impactful right now in societies that are most undemocratic, which is why we're seeing these tumults happening not only in the Arab world, but over the weekend there was a report that it's starting to happen in Nicaragua, where Ortega was a very close associate of Gaddafi. And I think this stuff is probably going to spread. There's really good reason to believe that it will. And I think that so who knows how long-term this prediction is? And I absolutely confess it's completely wish fulfillment kind of predictive stuff. But to me, it's actually so important that it be true, because if it's not true, we're effectively dead. I mean, another minor matter that was in my book, Peter Thiel, who's sort of a big picture thinker, has a quote in my book, and he makes it relevant to Facebook, but it's really relevant to everything, that either globalization works or we might as well just give up, because we don't really have a choice. And I think there are plenty of forces that suggest that it's going to be hard, but we are living in a precarious time as a planet, as a race of beings, and we really better just hope that this prediction is right.
Well, and I'm glad you made that prediction, because I get a lot of heat for being the Pollyanna on the show and saying things like that quite often. And what I think people get caught up in is looking very closely at the graph, right? And we see like, oh, we're in a recession and the crime is rising, and focusing on the negatives, which may be evolutionarily a positive thing, right? Because it helps us to avoid the negatives if we focus on them, and helps us to survive longer. But when you step back and you look at where society has been over thousands of years, we've got better nutrition, we're living longer, more people are better off than they have been thousands of years ago. So the trend is definitely positive.
The trend is phenomenally
it's
positive.
Slow, though, right? That's the problem, is it's so stinking slow that it's sometimes hard to see that the trend is in that direction. But yeah, I mean, if you look at the raw data, which is hard, it's a rational measured thing to do, to look at the data, but we just don't always do that as a human race. We look at it and go, bah, everything's terrible, even though it might just be a tiny blip that is much higher than all the other blips we've ever had, but we have no reference point for that sometimes.
By the way, there is a way to look at that data very effectively at gapminder.org, which is a site put together by I think he's a Swedish social scientist working with the UN, where he basically charts a huge range of indicators of national economic, medical, social progress. And when you look at it, it's amazing how much progress has occurred in an astonishingly short time. I mean, the lifespans, infant mortality, even education rates, they have been improving on a global basis with astonishing speed, which is really a nice thing to be reminded of, considering that if you look at the news, it's pretty easy to get bummed out, although I find this recent news about the Arab world pretty exciting.
Yeah, I also it just brings to my mind this idea of, the future is brighter and we need to be a little bit more optimistic in all of this. I don't see how any of this can happen. This equity, because basically what we're talking about is for us to reach some kind of equity, and the equity creates opportunity. It's actually something, as quote unquote Americans, we're always touting the idea that, well, equality means opportunity, and anybody can pull themselves up by their bootstraps and make something of themselves because we are all equal in this way, and we all have the same sort of starting point or whatever. And I know you could argue one way or the other that that's an exaggerated ideal or whatever, but that's been the idea. But we're terrified of this idea. I think some are, that the rest of the world might also find parity, might also find equity, because that somehow threatens our ability to be way up here with our own version of equity and not have to share that equity with anybody else. Do you feel like technology is the key to bridge the gap between all of that fear and all of that sort of overprotectiveness of what's ours, and to be able to defeat that and become a greater worldwide peaceful bunch of people?
There's no question that is happening, and it's because of mobile technology most of all. I mean, everyone in the world is trying to get hold of a mobile phone, and there are already, around 3 billion people that have them, and an increasing percentage of them are smartphones, and people are using the internet on them. Their access to information and all kinds of benefits are increasing with astonishing speed because of that. And by the way, the U.S. is going to be certainly, the rest of the world, we better hope they come to parity. But unfortunately, the U.S. is in such a screwy position right now in terms of our attitudes towards education in particular, that we are seriously at risk of not being, met at parity, but being radically bypassed. I mean, we have already been bypassed by an astonishing number of nations on a whole range of metrics in terms of education, in terms of infant mortality, in terms of lifespan. If you look at that Gapminder thing, the U.S. is not the leading country on a lot of things. One thing it still is one of the top, if not the top, is GDP per capita, but that's just about money, And a lot of other indicators of quality of life, we have already fallen behind.
Ariel, we're all very positive, the three of us, I think, overall. Can you poke holes in our balloons, or are you right there with us?
A little bit, and I was wanting to listen for a while before being like a Debbie Downer on anything. I'm not super negative about it. I think it's a great forecast and definitely a hopeful one. But technology goes both ways, and if you look at things like the Drake equation, which is the equation of the likelihood of being able to find extraterrestrial intelligence, one of the parameters of that equation is civilizations developing technologies like nuclear bombs. And so it's just, weighing the good and bad factors of technology, because while technology, as it's advancing, is giving us this one-to-many power, so we can say one thing and thousands, if not millions of people can see it at once, we also have technology that allows one person to do something and kill millions of people. So there's definitely some bad things out there, and it's scary because it's something where there's always the possibility of you could have a society that is getting more and more positive and working towards peace. But sometimes all it takes is one, bad apple, and a lot of people can be killed instantly. And so that's why when we're searching for extraterrestrial civilizations, a lot of scientists think it's really hard, because a lot of scientists think that within the time period that someone would develop the ability to communicate through radio signals, they would also be developing the technology to wipe out their entire planet. And so I'm not trying to be Debbie Downer. I really want us to be working. And I am really inspired by the power that people feel that they have now, and how countries are able to watch a country somewhere else uprising and get inspired about that and actually make a difference. I think it's amazing and really great, and exciting to watch. Even if something bad does happen, I think it's really an interesting period to be living through. But yeah, technology works both ways. And so there's also the ability to just go completely the other way, even if you have a lot of people working towards peace. And so So that's the negative side of the argument.
Well, before I throw you the baton for your long-term prediction, I just want to say everything we needed to know we learned in Pixar's A Bug's Life, and you know it, people. The ants can rise up and take down the grasshoppers. That's what I say. All right.
Can I just throw one more response out on that one?
Absolutely. It has to be Pixar related. No, I'm just kidding. Be whatever you want. Go ahead.
I'm not deterministic about this. I don't believe it's inevitable. I think we all have to work really hard to make it true. And one of the things that I think Americans are extremely weak on is wanting the rest of the world to gain wealth and to actually come close to parity or even maybe bypass. It's probably better. I believe 9/11, I believe all kinds of things that are horrible in the world are very closely related to poverty and deprivation and economic and political inequality. And if we have, it's not just something sit around like watch the cell phones make it happen. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying it is absolutely incumbent on all of us to work toward this, and it's still not a given. But the thing that's really fascinating about what Ariel said, because she's totally right, I agree with basically everything she said. What's really amazing, I remember a friend of mine said this to me after 9/11, he said, considering how easy it is for somebody to wreak havoc, it's incredible that every day we don't have people like blowing up a gasoline tanker on the George Washington Bridge or something, because really any one of us could wreak havoc in a massive way anytime we wanted to. And it's kind of astonishing how seldom it does happen.
Well, with that note, let's jump over to your long-term predictions, Ariel. I'm excited to hear what you think will happen in the next 50, 100 years. When will we get our flying car? I'm hoping you're going to talk about.
I've got more space predictions, not necessarily flying car. Two small ones for the next 100 or so years. One is the discovery of a multiverse. So this is a theory that's gaining a lot of popularity lately. The idea that our universe isn't the end-all, be-all, that there are actually multiple universes out there. And right now there's some theories and reasons to believe why it's true, but we don't have a ton of discovery around it just yet. So I think within the next 100 years, we'll find more evidence of that. And then the second one for around 100 years is that we'll begin terraforming Mars. So that will actually, we're supposed to be landing humans on Mars in the 2030s through NASA. So I think within the next 100 years, we're actually going to start looking into building habitats on Mars and actually potentially looking into how we could terraform it.
Do you think I'm really a fan of the multiverse theories and all of the developments around them, and I know in a lot of ways it's based on the idea in quantum mechanics, very oversimply stated, that every point spawns every reaction, and universes are constantly being created by everything that happens. But one thing I've always read is people very careful to say, but we can't travel to these, that they're probabilities. Do you think we'll ever be able to actually visit a multiverse, or do you think we're just going to discover evidence of it?
If you want me to get into my prediction for 1,000 or so years, that's actually what I was going to say is the super crazy prediction that I have, is that the way we're able to, Amber Case, a cyborg anthropologist, puts this in a really lovely way. She calls our cell phones essentially technosocial wormholes. So the fact that we're able to whisper into a cell phone and someone in China all the way around the world can hear us. So the way that we're able to transport our voices and our images to other places around the world. Imagine if we could do that with data. And so when you start thinking about that, then maybe, in 1,000 years or so, we could actually be transporting ourselves through data. So it would be less about moving the physical self through light speed and more about actually seeing how we could transfer our data to someplace else. So that's more of the crazy prediction.
As information, you're saying?
Yeah, as information.
I clarify because whenever we talk about transferring data, I start to think of like AT&T, and I'm like, well, we'll never get there.
Yeah, thankfully, AT&T, I don't think will be around in 1,000 years. That's a huge prediction.
Another prediction. I'm using up all your predictions early. I'm sorry.
I know. I'm going to be all spent out quickly, but yeah, being able to transfer kind of our mentality or our mental state, the way that we're able to transfer our voice somewhere. So that's something. It's essentially what's the term that they use in Star Trek, where they're able to transport themselves from one place to another. If we're able to transport our information and have it be received by a physical thing somewhere across the universe, that might be how we could travel to these multiverses. It's more of a crazy prediction, but it's an interesting one to think about, and it's definitely something that theoretical physicists are contemplating the possibilities of.
David, any thoughts on transferring you as information to Mars one day? Looking forward to that?
Well, I want to try to make my crazy prediction based on this, so I'll come up with that in a minute. But one of the things that I would just comment is that I think, in an age of exponential increases in computing power and storage and such, it doesn't require 1,000 years for some of these somewhat crazy sounding things to start to happen. I actually don't think there's anything unreasonable about what Ariel said. I would only probably say it'll happen sooner rather than later, but it's true. Quantum computing is quantum physics is so amazing. Spooky action at a distance and all this stuff that they've identified where particles can actually sense on the other side of the planet a parallel particle that actually flipped or something. There's some forces that we are really only just had the tiniest beginning of understanding that might really might be tameable. But I want to, when we come to the crazy stuff, I'll expand a little further on that.
That sounds awesome. I still can't turn on a TV and not be amazed. I even understand the technology. I understand how we get signals now. I totally get it, but I still am blown away by it. To ask me, it's not that far from that. Just need to get physical matter, and we're good to go. So before we get on to our crazy stuff, we're going to talk a little bit about Squarespace, aren't we, Tom?
Yeah, this episode of FourCast is brought to you by Squarespace. Until we get the ability to transfer our entire body by information, one better way to transfer information is on your blog. And Squarespace is the fast and easy way to publish a high-quality website or blog. They have an easy-to-use UI for creating and managing. If you want to import your old blog over, you can do that. You can take all of your data from WordPress, from Blogger, from TypePad, bring it into Squarespace, and use their tools to tweak the templates in a really easy, intuitive way to make something look good. They have tons of templates, so you can start from there and then do some tweaking. You can do some CSS if you know CSS, or you can just ignore that and you're like, I don't even know what CSS stands for. You don't need to. You can just use the tools they have to move things around, tweak stuff, change colors, make it look the way you want to look, and then add things like Twitter or your Facebook wall posts or your Flickr, all in modules that are added very easily. And you can also take your data with you when you leave. They believe in data exportability, so you're not locked in to Squarespace. The advantage, though, is that if your blog gets really popular, it's going to hold up because Squarespace actually throws as much bandwidth against your blog as it needs rather than sort of locking you in to a particular type. So why not try it for free? We'll give you a 14-day free trial as a listener to FourCast. Just go to squarespace.com/FourCast. Sign up for the 14-day free trial. You can start your own blog promoting global harmony right now, or you can import a blog and just see how your blog would look. And Squarespace, we invite you to give it a try. In fact, we use it for FourCast Podcast. If you go to fourcastpodcast.com, you're looking at a Squarespace blog right there. So why not give it a shot? Squarespace.com/FourCast, and we thank them for their support.
Absolutely. It is time for the crazy-ass predictions. This is the really far out there stuff. The things like 2,000 years from now, we'll all be made of meatloaf or whatever comes to mind. I didn't want to use Tom's cheese line because he's famous for it. Let's keep it with Ariel. Ariel, I can't wait to hear about your crazy space predictions.
Do you have another one? Because I kind of spoiled you.
I have to think now because I used it up. Crap. Let's see. Well, I mean, a lot of it's about robotics being able to have the capacity to travel interstellar. So being able to actually travel to other star systems, I think, is definitely possible. So probably the crazy ass would be traveling to other galaxies, because when you think about the speed of light, it actually doesn't really go fast enough for us to be able to visit other galaxies within a human lifetime. So that's why I think really getting robotics and robots to be sent out to these different locations throughout the universe so that future humans could maybe download their mental selves into these robots so that we could actually be doing space travel. I think that's my realistic yet many hundreds of years out prediction.
Oh, I love this one. So this is great, because this idea that we have to be the ones who are physically there, right? Like we have to be doing the discovering, we have to pick up the rock samples, we have to bring them back. I guess ultimately we want to be able to do that. But in the interim, how cool would it be to really virtually be there and apply it to all kinds of stuff? You know, we do it now with bomb detection and disarmament. We do it with all kinds of things. We are trusting robots to do stuff more now than we ever have before. If we can get them more bipedal and get them more, you know, give them some coordination to the degree that we could, you know, at the very least remotely control them with our, you know, with ourselves, the way we do, say, spy plane runs over different countries and stuff. We do that from Nevada or whatever, and bombing runs and all sorts of things. And we do it with the eye of the plane. We know exactly where the bomb needs to go. It's as if we're physically there. We just need to go next step, put me in the robot, and let me be there to do the discovery and to do that stuff, and then go home at night and have dinner with the kids. I love that idea. It's a great prediction.
Well, it's a lot safer if we can pull it off, and it allows us to do a lot more in advance of showing up. I am a firm believer that there's no replacement for a human being present at whatever they're doing. I think there is just, if nothing else, an intangible advantage to being able to be there and manipulate things directly. But at the same time, you know, going to Mars, there's a lot of discussion about, well, do we make it a one-way trip, or do we put it off and wait until we have the technology to make it a two-way trip, and what does that mean, and can we survive? And so in that case, I'd much rather have some kind of telepresence robot that allows us to really explore Mars, and then maybe buy us the time to expand and explore and see what's there, so that we can eventually have a manned mission there as well.
Yeah, and I agree that there's no replacement for a human being there. So I guess the crazy part of the prediction is being able to actually transport that data of who yourself is into another physical thing across the universe, so that it doesn't feel like you're just in this all-encompassing 360 room, the way that a lot of augmented reality stuff does now. That you would actually yourself would be the robot. So you would actually be swapping your data into the robot, so you would actually have control. So it would be closer to, if you were watching, this is really geeky, the Battlestar Galactica prequel that was on the Sci-Fi Channel, where you're able to transfer yourself into a Cylon.
You're talking about Caprica?
Oh,
Caprica, yes, exactly. So in Caprica, they are able to go into this internet where their physical and mental self is completely surrounded in this other world. And then they're able to take that and transfer themselves to a robot. So you have this essentially soul of a human being who's operating a robot. So it is actually, that is your physical self. So I guess there's big technological leaps that need to be made, and not only finding stuff that's faster than light travel, but also finding stuff that allows our concept of ourself to be transported to some other capsule other than our human body.
David, can you see a use for this kind of technology?
Absolutely. And unfortunately, in order to kind of reply, I have to give my crazy long-term view, if you don't mind.
Go for it.
No, go for it. The time is now anyway. Have at it.
When you think about crazy long-term views, it's like, I can't think of anything that you would, I mean, this whole beam me up Scotty idea is the most compelling, attractive, and exciting long-term prediction almost that one can make. Especially if you combine it with everybody else having the same capability. So it kind of goes back to the, harmonious society thing I started out with or came earlier. But I just wanted totally echo that, but I actually think that we will get there, and you can actually see directional indicators today that give a sense of how it might happen. And, for example, I think Microsoft's Kinect product is probably the most significant hardware advance we've seen in recent years, and it really does sort of portend a kind of holographic reality that becomes quite routine in the fairly near future, so that we really will be able to feel like, I think, all you have to do is have a projector that takes the data that a more sophisticated Kinect-like set of sensors gathers, and you really can begin to have the appearance of being somewhere else. And then I think robotics is an interesting thing to throw in there, because who knows how we will combine holographic imagery of ourselves in a remote location with a robotic presence that gives us the feeling of being there. And also then you just look at what's already happening with augmented reality and take it a few steps further. I mean, I remember IBM, maybe 10 years ago, they were already talking about it, and they haven't really done it. But sampling of cities that was so photorealistically convincing that you really would be able to feel you were in the city. And, you obviously need to figure out a way to add smell and wind and things that are probably kind of a little harder to do today. But again, I think with exponential progress, we will get there too. So what I guess I'm predicting is that we may not actually physically move around that much in the future, but we will be able to have unequivocally the feeling that we have done so. And Mars would be no less likely than anywhere else within a reasonable, speed of light potentiality. I mean, I think when you get beyond somewhere where you can have these experiences with some approximation of in real time, because speed, the distances are so great that the speed of light would be, not enough to really make it feel instant, it becomes harder. But if we're just talking about being somewhere else on the planet or being on Mars, which is not really that far away in light terms, I think we will get there. And I think we can see it happening. And I think, we already have an astonishing set of disparate technologies that are in very crude form that are likely to converge so that we have this. And again, I just want to go back to that other thing. We damn well better hope that everybody has it. But I also think it will probably, if everybody has the kind of trivial ability to go anywhere, lead to greater understanding.
So if I read you right, you're saying that where our body is will end up just being sort of a non-factor, because we'll be able, through virtual reality and augmented reality, to experience any place at any time, sort of the way we've gone from saying I can only talk to somebody if they're right here with me. We can now talk to anyone anywhere on the planet at any time. We'll actually be able to experience being anywhere on the planet at any time.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think it was Ariel that just said the thing about, the phone, but in someone in China experiencing you. I mean, it's just sort of connecting the dots from there to a much more dramatic version of the same thing. And I think it's it's a little crazy. I'm acknowledging this is my crazy prediction, but I don't think it's completely crazy.
Well, that's why we do the crazy prediction. So you get a chance to kind of go out there on a limb, because that's where the really interesting stuff usually is.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a cool prediction. I think that we're probably just in the baby stages of something bigger. You just expand on what you know, and it seems like talking to a dude in China, which let's say 30 years ago seemed crazy the way we do it now. Doesn't sound so crazy now, so why not? I think your prediction is not only likely, but probably not all that crazy, and I will see you all on Mars. Any final thoughts on that, Ariel? Anything you want to add to it?
No, I think it's all great, and I kind of am enjoying how our various forecasts and predictions are actually tying together in a neat little bow of it leading to better understanding of ourselves and each other, and hopefully that promoting not only citizen science but also peace and greater contributing to the greater human good.
Excellent. I'm all for that. I'm also all for our 4 questions. This is time for 4 questions. It's where you guys get asked 4 questions by us. This segment is where you have to do it in real time. You do not stop and think you're on Mars and you're trying to get a phone call. Just answer with whatever comes to mind. Free association time. I think I'll start. Ariel, I'm going to ask you questions. Are you ready for me?
I guess as ready as I'll be.
All right, here we go. Will we ever have our own heads-up display installed in our brains? And if not, why not?
I say no because it would be extremely annoying, and the idea that we can't have ultimate control over our brains might be a bigger risk factor than most want to take. So I think if we had it, it would be similar to choosing to take drugs. You have to deal with the risk factor of not having complete control over your mind.
Correct answer. I would not want this done to me. Robot cab drivers, wave of the future or terrible, terrible idea?
I think it would be amazing and awesome. I think robot cab drivers and robot cars in general should absolutely be implemented. The only big hurdle that has to get past is people's psychological view of letting a robot take control of a car, because it's something where there's a lot of fascinating questions you can ask people about. Even if robot car accidents are only capable of killing, let's say, 500 people a year, and human accidents are capable of killing, let's say, 50,000 people a year, people will still typically want to say that humans should be the ones to be able to drive cars because robots are killing 500 people a year, and that's a horrible thing. So even though it might be safer, I think the biggest challenge is not the technology, it's the psychological hurdle of letting a robot drive you.
Yeah, we have some social hurdles to cross before we get there. Okay, this next question is kind of visual. I have in my hand a 4-month-old, hard as a rock Twinkie. It's from my son's
gross.
school experiment. The question for you is, predict how much longer this Twinkie will last.
Oh, God. 500 years. I don't know.
You're probably about
500
right.
years is
Probably a
fine.
half-life.
Yeah, that is the least crazy-ass prediction I've heard all day. And then finally, what movie that we know is coming out this year in 2011 do you think will be nominated for Best Picture next year?
Oh, God. I'm horrible at these questions.
Short term.
Isn't Ghostbusters 3 supposed to come out this year?
If Bill Murray ever picks up the script off his desk and reads it and approves it, yes.
Okay. And then what else isn't there supposed to be Batman? Another Batman this year?
2012 for Batman.
Crap. I don't know that.
We'll go with
I'm really
Ghostbusters
bad about
3.
movies. Huh?
I think Ghostbusters 3 is a good answer.
It's
Let's
a
go
fine
with that.
prediction.
Yeah, that'll be
yeah.
my answer.
All right, Mr. David Kirkpatrick, are you sitting comfortably, sir?
As comfortably as I can, given what you're probably about to throw at me.
All right, here we go. 4 questions. Question number 1, how long can Facebook last?
Well, Facebook will last indefinitely. It's just a matter of how central and important it remains. There's no question that, something called Facebook will be important in 5 years. In 10 years, it's a little less certain. But anything that gets that big, it'll be just like, AOL email addresses. There will be some people who use it even after something dramatic has come along that many of us feel would have replaced it. So, I would say, in your taxonomy, I don't know, 10 or 15 years at least, and probably longer. I actually said on a panel that I was on with Zuckerberg last summer that I thought it probably wouldn't exist in 40 years, and he was deeply offended. But in 40 years, I think it almost certainly won't exist.
All right, very, very well. Good example with AOL. I was like, well, if Friendster is still around, I guess Facebook will last quite a bit of time. But AOL is
barely still around, though.
Yeah, AOL is an even better example. Question number 2, who will become self-aware first? Google, Facebook, or 4chan?
Self-aware?
Like as a network. The network will actually contain its own intelligence.
Well, I actually think Facebook is kind of potentially evolving into a global brain, and it's not about the technology, it's about the people that are inside it. And so if you consider the system to include the people who are using it, I think that's kind of what Facebook already is.
All right. Fair enough. Question number 3. At what point will friendship be determined objectively and a social network can just tell you your list of friends right from the beginning because it'll know based on your preferences?
Isn't that what I predicted with my video thing before?
You kind of spoiled this question a little bit.
It would be exactly, that I think that will happen in the within 8 years, whatever. And it'll probably be based on some kind of analysis of our real world experience where our lives are being observed by a computer and the results are being fed to us as we choose.
And question number 4, when you teleport into your Martian robotic body, will you want it to be smaller, bigger, or the same size as your real body?
It's funny. Look, those kind of questions make you think of Second Life and the way that people pick these absurdly fantasy incarnations.
Totally.
So I guess on my assumption for myself would be that I would probably end up looking more or less the same, just because. And I've always tried to just use my own name and my email address. And I think it's one of the reasons I found Facebook interesting is because I've always had this impulse to be my real self. But I think the average person, most people are going to, really augment themselves to be, very buff and gorgeous. And that probably means bigger and healthier.
All right. Very good. Those are your 4 questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, you guys did an awesome job. For the record, 4chan is already aware of itself, Tom. Just want to clear that up.
It's very aware of itself in many ways. You're right.
It has, someone in the chat room says it has a very short memory, which is a good point, so it may not last. Thank you guys so much for being here. That's going to do it for the episode. It was wonderful having you here. David, tell us a little bit more about your book and where people can find it.
Well, it's out in paperback now in the United States, and it's come out in about 10 other countries already. It's a bigger seller in Japan than in the United States at the moment. It's called The Facebook Effect, the inside story of the company that's connecting the world. And it's a history of Facebook, and I still think the only book that anybody's written that tried to take stock of what it meant. And the only final thing I would say is I'm really excited about how much I wrote in it about politics, considering I finished it over a year ago. I was hoping and sort of thinking this kind of thing might happen, but the book begins with kind of a prediction that this kind of thing we're seeing now would happen. So I guess I believe it's going to happen even more in the future.
Yeah, it's a good feeling.
So they can find it at The Facebook Effect on Facebook. So facebook.com/TheFacebookEffect.
Yeah. But you can order it from Amazon for $8.
Oh, awesome. There you go. Thank you again for being here. Ariel Waldman, tell the fine folks on the internet where they can find more about what you're up to.
I'm Ariel Waldman on Twitter, but you can also go to spacehack.org, which is a directory of ways to participate in space exploration. So you can start discovering galaxies or building robots and sending them to the moon actually today. So it's a directory of different ways that you can get involved and connect with people in the space industry and start actually contributing to scientific discovery. So it's pretty exciting.
Very cool. Tom, we have yet predicted again. We have done it again. We have forecasted the future right here on FourCast.
Yes, once again. And thanks to some really smart guests, we actually didn't have to show off how little we actually know about the future, unlike last week when we had the tables turned on us. Don't forget, folks, too, that you can also enjoy our discussions of the currently geeky things on Current Geek, available at currentgeek.com.
That's absolutely true. They got some more ones coming out some new ones coming out this week. Don't forget, go to the website. It's fourcastpodcast.com. Send us your email at fourcastpodcast@gmail.com. That's going to do it for us. We'll see you.
Thank you, guys.
But it's only 32 years away.